Me and Eva here.
Here we are.
Here we are. So maybe we can be talking to thousands of people. Maybe it's just like two. So either way, I like that possibility. But thank you so much, Eva. Thank you so much for joining us today and being part of our inaugural poetry hour. Notes from the field. And when I mean poetry, I mean like very broadly. So we're not, we're not necessarily just going to be talking about poetry, but we're going to be talking about you, writing, and life in general. So again, thanks so much to the YubaSutter Regional Arts Council for providing the platform, providing the programming, and all of the technical support. Thank you so much, Shantae. I really appreciate that. So I'm just going to read a little bit introducing Eva, and then we will go right into have Eva read an excerpt from her work, after which we will talk a little bit. And I believe you can enter in questions if you have any, and I will field them and kind of talk about them. If that's not correct, because StreamYard is a little different, correct me, Shantae, in the chats, but I believe that people can post up their own questions. So, Eva Recinos, oops, sorry, I logged out, is an LA-based arts and culture journalist and creative nonfiction writer focusing on stories that often get left out of mainstream media. Her profiles, features, and reviews have appeared in the Los Angeles Times, Good, The Guardian, KCET Artbound, Art21, just about, so many places, Vice, Bitch, Jezebel, and so many more. Eva was a 2019 finalist in the LA Press Club Awards for Arts and Entertainment's feature. And in Eva's creative nonfiction writing, she explores Latinx identity, education, and mental health. Eva's essays have appeared in Electric Literature, Catapult, Refinery, Marie Claire, and many more. Also a 2019 Idlewild Writers Week Nonfiction Fellow, a 2020 finalist in the Center for Women's Writers International Literary Awards, and a finalist in the Blood Orange Review 2020 Creative Nonfiction Contest. Eva runs a free monthly newsletter for creatives called Notes from Eva, and you can contact via email on our website or maybe on Twitter. Yeah, so Eva, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. Like I told you before, if we were in person, I would definitely bring my copy of your book for you to sign. So this is really an honor. Thank you so much.
So Eva, would you like to begin the evening off reading a short selection from your work?
Yes, I would. So I'm going to read a couple of shorter pieces. This first one is called Yellow Trumpet Flower, and it appeared in Pink earlier this year, last year, quarantine time. I have no idea, no clue anymore. But it's a piece that has to do with neighborhoods and Los Angeles, where I'm born and raised. So that's a little bit of introduction to that. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Yellow Trumpet Flower. Abandoned furniture marks my daily walk to the bus stop. Coffee tables with missing legs, a mattress with a piece of paper on it that reads, "No bed bugs," a warning to anyone who might want to drag it home. A black leather couch bakes in the sun. The ghost of someone's imprint remains, teeth marks on half a sandwich, a rotting relic. These, the only indications of chaos on a block that goes quiet after dark. I often lie in bed and marvel at the silence. There's no buzz of helicopter blades, no laughter or clink of bottles from people outside, no drivers racing by with the music so loud they set off the alarms of parked cars. My childhood neighborhood, 14 or so miles away, lingers over me, a blueprint projected onto this new apartment, superimposed over its walls. Stereotypes and fears about my childhood neighborhood abound, even outside of Los Angeles. In a San Diego cafe, I sit sipping tea and reading while a family eats at a table nearby. They chat about what areas of LA they plan to visit. Don't go to Compton, one of them says. And don't go to East LA? Or where's that? South Central LA? The southern area of LA? The area where my family's lived for the past 29 years. South Central Los Angeles is rife with history. To me, it's every crisp bite I've taken into the tang of sour cream and saltiness of cheese layered on top of the elote we just bought from the man who walked by with his roving food stand. It's the smell of the panaderia on Sunday, the rustling of the paper bag as I peek inside to choose my favorite piece of bread. It's the sound of drums in Leimert Park. Against exceptional odds, Black or brown people raise their families here. I pack up my things and leave the cafe, not wanting to hear more about what other people have to say about where I grew up. People seem happy when I tell them that my boyfriend and I are relocating to Glendale next, but they warn me to keep an eye out for one thing: the erratic drivers. I don't understand the concern. Drivers in LA thrive on lawlessness on the road, all zigzags and lead feet on the gas pedal. Pedestrians know their safety doesn't come first. An Uber driver tells me I never walk with my kids in Glendale. These are the stories we tell before we even get to a place. On a sunny weekend afternoon, I cross the street at an intersection with no light. Just a painted crosswalk, a mere suggestion that most drivers ignore, and a car lurches toward me. I wait for it to register my presence and crawl to a semi-stop before screeching off again, but it doesn't stop and it's coming faster than I expected. I brace myself for impact. I dig my feet into the ground and put my palm out just as the driver brakes. The middle crease of my hand plants itself right in the center of the car's hood. The driver screams, her window still up. I walk away, shaken. My palm hurts for the next couple of days. I wonder what would have happened if she didn't stop in time. I just want to give a content warning that there are some brief descriptions of violence for the next few parts. When I was younger, I'd sometimes imagine I would die by getting shot, either by a stray bullet or a purposeful one, because I looked at someone the wrong way in our neighborhood. I'm shaken by the encounter with the car, suddenly aware of my mortality, no matter where I might live. I grew up hearing about gang initiations and street muggings, warnings against walking in the street. I only walked in the daytime. Once, a man pulled up to the sidewalk trying to convince me to get in his car, but instead just handed me his CD after I politely declined. Once, a woman screamed, "Hey," behind me, and my shoulders tensed instinctively. She told me that my skirt was stuck inside my tights. During a walk to the library, a man gently picked up a butterfly off the ground, placed it in his hand, and talked to us about its beauty. My mom and I took it as a sign from my father who died that year. You never know who you might encounter on the city's streets. My partner asked me to take a stroll late one night in Glendale, and I scoff. We don't do that where I grew up. He says he walks around our new neighborhood at night all the time, often after I'm asleep. I reluctantly walk with him, instinctively scanning the street for danger and watching the shadows behind us. But nothing happens. Except one day, there's a stabbing in neighboring Pasadena close to where my mom works. I start noticing more spray-painted phrases on the sidewalks outside my apartment. The storage space above our assigned parking spot inside a gated parking lot is broken into, some of our belongings stolen. In the middle of the night, a man yells loudly, his voice ripping through my heavy layer of sleep. My heart pounds against my throat as I open my eyes. For a moment, I don't feel safe anymore. 4 of the yellow trumpet flower trees on our block have bloomed, shocks of yellow against the gray of the concrete. Eventually, they wither up and fall to the ground, husks of their ebullient selves in full bloom. I take photographs of these trees on our block just like I snap portraits of the woozy palm trees in South Central LA. Nature doesn't realize how we separate things. We construct those borders ourselves. Wanted to also read another short piece that hasn't been published. It's called Still Life, and I am very much an art history nerd, and so I always love these still life paintings of food, and I wanted to imagine what I would ask a painter to put in mine if I was able to commission one. So here's what I came up with. 1. A package of ranchero queso fresco, open just slightly. As a kid, when I sneak into the fridge to swipe a slice, I notice how the liquid pools at the bottom. The queso is salty and savory in my mouth. Other times, my mom heats up tortillas on the stove, and we nestle a piece inside, or we crumble it over beans next to steaming plantains and eggs. Eating it alone, though, is heaven. 2. A little hill of tajin, that addictive, spicy dust that makes fruit instantly better to eat, although maybe it defeats the point of eating fruit for its nutritional value. My dad liked putting salt on orange slices. I forgot about this until I talked to a friend during quarantine, and the memory returned. These small facts about people we've lost are proof that we're still grieving. 3. Fried Mojara on a plate. When I was little, my mom cleaned the fish and sometimes stuck her hand in it and made it talk to me. It's perhaps cruel, but it made me laugh every time. When it arrived at the table sizzling, she would tell me to use a fork to get the bones out, but I always just dug in with my hands. The crisp skin crunched between my teeth and the soft meat dissolved on my tongue. Lime juice ran down my hands. No one could steal this joy. 4. Ceviche. Not the raw kind, but the kind with cooked shrimp, tomato, onion, cilantro, clamato, and a little bit of ketchup if you like. It made me feel like a grown-up, especially when my mom served it in a glass. She still does this for me when I visit as an adult. 5. A single thick round of abuelita hot chocolate. I made a cup of it for my partner the first time he came inside the house, supposedly to drop off a jacket I left in his car, but mostly to see me again. I didn't know what to offer him, so I served him the warmth and comfort of that hot chocolate. I sat across from him as we sipped, my cousin watching TV nearby. I felt whole. 7 years later, he gives me a package of the hot chocolate as a Hanukkah gift. 6. The discarded peel of a plantain. My mom used to cradle slices of fried plantain, moving deftly from pan to kitchen counter with her spatula. I would sneak in and steal one or two, and she talked about how there must be a mouse around because slices kept going missing. 7. A can of mango kerns with the trademark hummingbird floating near the logo, my cousin's favorite drink. To grieve as an adult is to experience denial when you're at the grocery store alone. I wanted to buy him a kerns during quarantine, but I realized he was gone. The juice always tastes like an exaggeration of its fruit flavor, mango turned up to the loudest volume and mixed in with the taste of cold aluminum. 8. One Guatemalan tamal, with the banana leaves drooping to reveal its glistening insides. Raisins, prunes, pickled bell peppers, green olives, chicken or pork, and the recado, a sauce that requires you to use the blender over and over until it comes out smooth. As a kid, these ingredients are just parts of a recipe that I don't question. As an adult, they are the sour, the sweet, the salty elements that make it a whole meal. We continue the tradition of making them after my dad's death. This year, we exchanged our ratings of them out of 10 stars. We didn't mention it, but we knew we were missing my cousin's rating too. 9. A warm cubilete, plucked from a grease-stained panaderia bag. In layman's terms, a cubilete is a muffin, but to my child's mind, it's a piece of fluffy joy. I lick the thin, waxy wrapper when I'm finished. I want to get every last little crumb, every reminder of the sweetness in that first bite. Thank you. It is weird not to see everyone. I'm like, are people here? Oh, I can't hear you. I think you're muted.
I was muted. Thank you. Thank you so much for that. That was beautiful, gorgeous.
Thank you.
So evocative too of like imagery, and there's so many things that I wanted to talk about. You know, I am not an art history buff or anything, but I do love art history, and it really just got me thinking, you know, of these still lives and of the still lives that we don't really see, of the still lives that we speak into existence, maybe. Because we are, you know, I love ekphrastic art and I love art that talks about art. And, you know, everything that you're talking about is very, I guess, imagistic in a very almost surreal way. And so and that really added to like the texture and the emotional resonances
Thank
to to the piece, the exaggeration of the mango and the aluminum. But just, I guess, moving from image to image, the images are very visceral. And so I guess I wanted to ask you how, if imagery plays a big part in your memory and in tapping in those memories, or do those images come afterwards, kind of upon reflecting? So I guess, what is your memories made up of? Is it mostly images, and by images I also mean like, tastes, because smells, touch, and all that. So the through the senses. So I guess, I don't know if I'm even asking a question, but maybe just how do you deal with memory in your work?
That's a great question. I feel like from the beginning, the sense that I was going with was taste for that specifically, because I love to eat. So it's funny, I was just talking to my partner about it, and I was like, I really wanted this piece to be happy, and then it just got sad, which I'm sure you can relate to, happens sometimes, because I started with, this is the food that I love. And then I thought about the still life. I was looking at still lifes because I'm just always looking at old art, and I was thinking, oh, what if you kind of got to remix or redo a typical classical still life and you included food that is not normally in there? And then the still life too, as a medium, is a lot about mortality and about how short life is and all that. And so the grief component came in that way as well. So I do feel like I started with taste and smell. And then I've been thinking a lot about early childhood memories, and I realized that food was connected to so many of them, and also thinking about who we've lost is in that connection, and how we relate to people is in that connection. And also thinking about with a visual, like if I open my refrigerator, what's in there that I can tell you I've been eating since I was a child? What's in my pantry that I can tell you I remember a specific memory about? And there's been times, when I was in college or living on my own for the first time, where I would say, why don't I have any queso ranchero on my fridge right now? Why don't I have any, of the good beans or what have you? I think there's this connection with wanting some of that childhood comfort. So I do think that for that particular piece, they worked hand in hand. But I think in general, I think visually, especially when thinking about LA and South Central, because I want to place people there, and I want to make sure that the setting is strong and that those elements are in place, so that when I start telling you the story, you know exactly where you are from the beginning of it, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I mean, it really would show a kind of writing in which, the writer is not writing about it, but writing from within it. As in other stories that get told, in which it's a little bit more superficial, but the details that that a writer brings to it, I think, can tell a lot about their relationship to that place. And the details that I saw in your work, and did feel as if you were writing from within. And so place, is very important. I imagine something very important for you, and the changes of that place, of those places, right? So how do you see those changes in those places maybe affecting changes in your work? Is there a parallel there?
Yeah, I mean, I think that obviously with areas like South Central, there's always this fear of gentrification, and it's a valid fear, and there are a lot of changes happening in the neighborhood, and I have lost a lot of sleep, to be honest, over making sure that I'm portraying it in a way that is honest to my experience, but that is also layered and complex, because the last thing I want to do is feel like I'm oversimplifying it or painting it in a negative light, but at the same time wanting to put in all those truths of what the area was like when I was growing up there and what it's meant to me, if that makes sense. I feel like just making sure that it's complex has been a big thing for me. But yeah, I would say there are a lot of visual things that I'm thinking about, just in terms of like what signs have changed, what stores aren't there, what kind of cars are there, what kind of like houses are there. There's a lot of those craftsman style houses, single family homes in that area, and now I can see one or two modern houses on a certain block, more apartment buildings, that sort of thing. So just kind of slowing down. We were talking about this a little bit before too. Walking, I think, is especially important. Slowing down and thinking about those changes and what they might represent, and also just looking to the future and thinking, how long will it look like this particular version? And I
Hmm.
think too, thinking about a lot of it is connected to my childhood and making it clear that, that was how it was then and it's just gonna keep changing.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, we all. I think we all tend to think of those hallowed spaces of our childhood as immobile, and maybe for nostalgic reasons, we do keep them in like a special little bubble. But like you say, walking being an exercise of observance, being an exercise of awareness of the changes that are happening. Because you know, I guess tell me a little bit about your material. Tell me a little bit. You meant you have in your bio about these stories that often get left behind, and we got a little bit of taste of that here. Pun not intended, but I guess it works. It works both ways. So you can take it how you like. But so we got to see a little bit about that here. But what are some of these other stories that you are interested in that you feel like get left behind, and really leaves it up um, to people like yourself to carry them forward?
Yeah, I think that, of course, South Central has been something that I've been wanting to write about more because it is something where people will say like, "Oh, I don't wanna go there," or like, "Oh, you're from there." There's, like, these very quick visceral reactions to that I feel like absolutely leave out any other nuance to that, and of course, that was kind of what the first piece was about is, like, all sections of LA and major cities are relegated to stereotype or characterized in a certain way, but just trying to think of what does it mean when you have that connection, how can you talk about that connection? And I think also with thinking about food, I wanted to bring up sensory details, but I didn't want to over explain what each food item was. I wanted you to figure it out, or maybe you had that instant connection.
Hmm.
I didn't want it to be something that felt because I think a lot of the times there's a struggle with writing about food if you feel like it's catering to a Western gaze and you're kind of like writing about this exotic food, quote unquote, right?
Right.
So how could I celebrate these ingredients in this history without making it something that fell into that category? And I think for me it was playing with the sensory parts of it and giving you a little bit of detail about what everything was, but mostly just saying why I loved it so much, I think is important for sure. And just, I don't know, for me, especially in studying art and thinking about contemporary art, I think there are so many narratives that are out there about who makes art, where it's made, where you can see it, where you should see it. And a lot of my writing lately, in terms of memoir and creative nonfiction, has been going back to my childhood and saying, where did I see art before I even stepped into a museum, before I even stepped into a gallery? Where was
Hmm.
the color around me? Where was, again, going back to the senses? Because I think that's important and that's just as valid. I mean, obviously, I love going to museums, even though I know that they're flawed spaces, and I love seeing art and I miss seeing art. But I think that it's always been something where I'm interested in what else, what is outside of these spaces that we should be paying attention to.
Yeah. Oh, I miss museums so much.
Oh,
Um,
so hard.
just on the side, what's your favorite museum?
Oh man, that's such a hard question.
Or I guess your favorite museum experience, because you could like a museum at different exhibits and all that. So maybe a favorite museum experience.
I mean, I've really been tempted to go to the Huntington lately because they have so much outdoor space as well.
Hmm.
It's kind of, I guess it would depend what's on view. I forget if they have that many rotating shows, but that seems really nice because at least you would have space to be far from people, right?
Yeah.
I think that would
Yeah.
be the ideal thing. But there's so much street art and public art, and a lot of spaces have been doing things like storefront, window front exhibitions to try to at least create something for people to see, which I think is amazing.
Right. Because we're engaging with art in a completely different way. in
Yeah.
completely different spaces. I know I have never before followed these many galleries, artists, and collectives on like Instagram than ever before, because it's been like the only way that I can like, you know, not just see what's up, but like just engage with it. And like I'm not in a big city, the Yuba Sutter area is more rural. We do have like some collectives, and this is the regional arts center, so this is like the cultural hub of that.
Yeah.
But I do, being part of a bigger city, I do miss the different ways that you engage with art, not just through like public arts, commissions, public arts project, but yeah, like where did you experience art before you entered a museum? And for me, yeah, museums, being very problematic places, museum directorship being very problematic, and so on. And then not only that, but like their funding, like the Sacklers funding the Guggenheim pretty much. And then really exploiting people who would really benefit from the opportunity of being shown there, while having to kind of stomach knowing that your art is you are benefiting from that colonial violence. So I had so many other things to ask, but I just got sidetracked with me thinking of museums. My favorite is the Detroit Museum.
Oh, I've never been. There's so many. I mean, I have such a long list of museums and art spaces that I want to go to. We were supposed to go to Paris before all this happened, so
Oh no.
maybe maybe in a few years.
Yeah, so I mean, in thinking about you were saying about not over explaining, and that's a big theme, that, or something that I thought about as well for me. Do I want to have, my mother doesn't speak English, do I want to have her dialogue in Spanish without explanation, with Spanish but explain it, so me translating it with, or in English, and just acknowledge, I guess, facilitating it for the reader. And I ended up ultimately writing it, her dialogue in English, with prefacing it that it was all in Spanish, but with other things like references, to things that you don't want to over explain. I guess my question goes around to, like, who do you see as your audience? And does I guess, and is that kind of, does that inform how you write, in terms of like either explaining or just assuming that people know what Sábado Gigante is, right? Or
Yeah,
something like that.
I think that's so hard. I think at the beginning, especially when I started writing about South Central, I was angry about how the older I got, the more I realized how stereotyped it was, the more I realized how, also just being a Latina woman, there was a lot of stereotype that went with that. So sometimes I think I started to realize that I was coming off as, I guess, a little defensive. I didn't want to write just to prove like we are great. There are lots of layers.
Right.
And I think so far my way of navigating that has been to actually pull from articles, to pull from photos and the like, and try to say it in a way that's like, I want you to see the beauty of it, but I also, if you don't want to see it, I did the best I can. And like, let's talk about the history of the area and why you should care. But at the end of the day, I can't actually convince anyone to care, if that makes sense. So I think that's definitely a big part of it. I mean, with some of the other references, I get excited whenever somebody says like, yeah, I ate that when I was a kid, or yeah, I know what you're talking about with, just things like the corner store. Like, I had a similar corner store. I grew up in a similar neighborhood. I think that's awesome. But I also, I'd love for people to engage with it who are just curious. I'm curious about those things. Like, I love eating. So I think if somebody wrote an essay about food that I didn't recognize the foods, I would look it up. I would want to try it. I want to know more about it in a way that was respectful. But I think that curiosity is something that I've always tried to encourage, or always try to engage with. I think curiosity in a really respectful way of like I said, these stories that I feel like get left out of the mainstream. And I should say I do really love reading the best food writing anthologies every year.
Hmm.
I think they're great, and sometimes it's nice to kind of read outside of my usual genre. And I just think that the way that you enter a story, there's so many ways to enter it, whether it's a neighborhood or food or art or what have you. And I think if someone just has a general curiosity, there you will find something there, right? Like this feeling of the more specific you are, the more universal. And
Right.
I've grappled with that. I thought like, are some of my stories not universal enough? Is there not as much of an entry? Is someone going to twist my words a certain way? But I think those are risks that you're always going to run when it comes to this kind of thing.
Yeah, and I mean you absolutely read my mind, because the next thing that I was going to talk about is, I guess, I tend to be tired of having to explain that what I'm talking about is universal, that it isn't too niche to understand and only go to for information, or only go to, you know, to enlighten white people. That the stories that you are writing about, there is a universalizing aspect in them. And so the curiosity with which somebody can come to, not having known these foods, I think does the same amount of work as in universalizing the subject as me, who does recognize the like adult feeling of a cocktail, even though it's like virgin, but it's like it comes in like a little goblet and all that. So both coming with a knowledge of that, and then also without. I think it's way overdue. I think it's not overdue, but it's a what's the word? It's a conversation that is a tired conversation, because how could not our work be universal, right? How could not your concerns about place, about home, about food not be universal, right? So I really appreciate that, and I appreciate you voicing that and really subverting the narratives that we hear. And I know you say you take a lot of care into that, into complicating the narratives that we have. Um, so I guess I mean I could talk on about art forever. Um, and so maybe it's a good segue into thinking about where we're at right now. We were just talking. We were just talking about public art, right? That wasn't in my imagination.
Yeah, no, we totally were.
Okay. I'm very foggy. Um, but how we engage with art differently now because of the pandemic. But
Mhm.
how has the pandemic specifically affected your writing? And what are some of the things that you're doing to move around those obstacles? Maybe has your process changed at all?
Yeah, so I actually started taking a catapult class. It's called Memoir in a Year. And in a way, that's something that I don't think would have been possible because if I'm not mistaken, a lot of their classes are based on the East Coast.
Yeah.
But I've taken the class, so that's been really incredible because I get to meet with this group of other really incredible writers working on their memoir, and we are from a lot of different places, and some of us have moved during the pandemic, and we've just been really open with each other about there are other things going on,
Mhm.
and writing is important, and the writing is there, but the writing isn't the only thing. Like if you don't take care of you, there isn't going to be any writing.
Right.
And I think that's been really incredible, just in terms of being able to hop onto that Zoom call with all of those writers to be able to swap writing. And, in a way, I can't be distracted on the weekends because I am not getting any invitations to go out to brunch. So I have to put my butt in the seat and actually work on my pages. I try to look at it that way. Of course, I miss all of the things from the before times, but you know, if I had if I had to, that's what I would spend my time doing is writing, and I think processing some of those things. This is the most that I've journaled in a long time. I don't
Hmm.
usually journal, but I didn't know how else to get it out. There's a lot of things where I just hand wrote. I just hand wrote, and sometimes I didn't even realize how much I wrote until I went back and looked at all the pages. And taking off that pressure of, before it was, okay, I have to go to work and the commute, and I'm trying to be a good friend, a good daughter, a good partner, etc. And you feel like you only have so much time. And sometimes I would feel like if I'm gonna write, it has to get placed somewhere. It has to get published somewhere. It has to go to someone has to see it. And I think being in this sort of quarantine time has taken that pressure off to say it doesn't have to see the light of day. It doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a process. Sometimes you might come back to it. Sometimes you might not. Just because I think for some reason there's been like a slight shift in that point of view that has been really, really helpful, and is trying to get me back to the place where I was when I was younger, where I didn't worry about those things as much, and writing was just a way to process everything. So I think that's really helpful, and it actually took me a while to write about the quarantine. I feel like some writers, like 2 months in, were like, boom, I have my response piece. It's beautifully written. It's so thoughtful and smart. And I was just like, we're still living it. I have no idea. I don't know how to write about this. So I think late last year was the first time that I wrote something. It was about walking in LA, and an art piece by an artist named Carmen Argote, which was a video piece, speaking of interacting with art. So I didn't see it in person. I watched it on my computer like 10 times. And that was the first time I wrote about COVID and the quarantine, because I just couldn't do it any earlier than that. It was too much.
Right. Yeah, that's really, really interesting about and I'm thinking of in grad school. I remember we had a conversation of like how soon was too soon to write about 9/11, and some writers were writing, I didn't go to grad school in 9/11, like um, you know, but that was like the closest approximate of like a major shift in cultural consciousness
Yeah.
that we can pinpoint that as our lives before 9/11 and our lives after 9/11. I think COVID is another one of those huge cultural shifts in which it's going to mark, it's a much longer mark because it's lasted so long. But I guess for me, I had to write the absolute now, because I knew that if I distanced myself from it, my perspectives on it were going to change. And maybe I was afraid of losing the emotional resonances that were present as I was feeling it. So I never wrote like contemporary issues, because I always felt also like, I don't know if I should I don't like, but I guess this goes back to asking you, you kind of answered the question, but how do you feel about, I guess, not just necessarily COVID, but do you need that distance from your material in order to, I guess, more objectively reflect on it, or do you, is there a way that you maybe do a wormhole and access that past more, what's the word, more viscerally?
Yeah, I think one thing that reminded me of also in some of my journaling, what I did, again, talking about walking, is I wrote down weird things that I saw. I didn't have the mental capacity to make it a whole scene. But I
Mm-hmm.
just wrote down, today I saw a mask in a gutter. Today I saw, you know, whatever. Today I tweeted at some point that I wanted a sign that just said your dog is cute, because I kept staring at people across the street, but I was wearing the mask. So they were probably like, why is she looking at me? But I just left their dog. So it was like weird things like that. Thinking
Yeah.
about these different interactions and little images. And I just thought, I'm just gonna write them down. Am I gonna do anything with them? I don't know, but at least it's like some way of keeping it there, because I agree. Like I forget things for sure. Like those small things sometimes can affect you when you're on your walk, and you think like, okay, I'll write it down or I'll remember, and you don't. So I think that's helpful, and doing it in a way that's not super stressful or a lot of pressure on yourself, I think has been really helpful for me. But yeah, I think just in general, I don't know. I think certain things do need some distance.
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember where I've heard this, but there's that saying about like writing about something when it's a scar, not a wound.
Mm.
So like right when you're in the thick of it, I think it is hard, and I think I've benefited in some instances from waiting. And I also think it's interesting. to, just consider the idea of revisiting certain things. I don't know if this is your experience, but talking to other writers who say that they don't necessarily think just because they wrote it in their first memoir or their first collection of essays that they can never talk about that thing again, because it will always change the more that you just live and the more that you go through things. And I think that's super interesting too, because at one point I did think, if I write about this one thing this one time, that's it. Not allowed, no more. But I think that definitely is something that is worth experimenting with if it seems like you can have that kind of bandwidth. But yeah,
Right.
I don't know. I think for me, the entry point in for finally writing about COVID was through an artwork.
Mm-hmm.
I admired what Carmen did in that artwork, and it kind of helped me sort through some of my thoughts. And then I was also thinking about some of the recent writing I've done about recent grief in light of losing my dad when I was a lot younger. So I think also seeing how you can get in through different points and have different focuses is always interesting to me.
Mm-hmm. The immediacy is in that entry point,
Mhm.
um, which like bridges the gap to the things further away. And it's those associative leaps that I think a lot of the writers that I admire do, in which we are brought kind of like through the back door to their memory, uh, but we're very present through that journey of like starting off with like a piece of art that they just experienced, they just saw, or a very offhanded experience, and then using that to kind of like catapult or into the narratives that we're kind of getting into. So yeah, I think that's really wonderful. And I like that what you say, the scar, right, about the scar, not a wound. How does
Mhm.
it go? Right when it's a scar, not a wound.
Mhm.
Um, yeah. So thank you. I want to field some questions.
Yeah.
And I have somebody who has asked, who are your, and I was actually going to ask this too, so it kind of, who are your influences? Questions for both. So who are some of, the writers who are important to you? Maybe, were important to you at one point, but no longer are. I know those things change, and embarrassingly so. I won't admit who was important to me early on. Uh, now I'm like, I'll say edgy people. That sound cool, but before it was like, but yeah, who are maybe your people who are important to your work right now, and if you wanted to add, like, who were those people early on?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's always so hard for me because I mean it is always changing, and I think it depends what mood I want to be in when I'm writing. So I
Hmm.
don't know if that's the same for you. Yeah. I'm kind of like,
Yeah,
do I want to be really sad? Do I want to be really lyrical? Do I want to get weird? Like what's
yeah.
the vibe? But I mean, I just feel like I've been reading so much memoir and collections of essays. Right now, I'm taking the Catapult class with Megan Steelstra. She's really fantastic. Of course, I love a lot of what Roxane Gay does, and Esme Wijun Wang, and just thinking about also, because this is Poetry Hour, I pulled up some of my favorite books. This book by Victoria Chang called Open.
Obit, yeah.
I mean, come on. It was like I was sitting on my couch reading these poems aloud and trying so hard not to cry. It just it's so good in playing with format
Uh-huh.
and just really getting to the heart of this really sad and intense experience. But again, talking about universality because the story is specific, but every single poem in there you would be hard pressed to not relate to. And
Right.
I think she's just really mastered that, and it's really amazing. There's this writer named Marcelo Hernandez Castillo whose memoir
Oh,
I really like. I don't know if you've heard of him.
hey.
So yeah, I mean, also I have such a deep admiration for people who can do more than one genre. And so thinking about poetry and memoir, poetry and creative nonfiction, your book was so fantastic in that. I also thinking about people like Saeed Jones as well. And it's just, kind of all over the map, to be
Yeah.
honest. I read a lot of art criticism and art writing as well, so I think that's important to me.
Oh, great. Yeah, I love writers who jump genres, and like I think it's almost an affront to how I was taught. And I only took like poetry classes. I only took like creative writing classes rather than like, and it wasn't until grad school that I finally stepped out and I was like, oh, I want to take some like photography classes, and I want to take some, I took some theory classes on like Foucault, and I wish I would have just not been so serious.
Yeah, yeah. But I think it's hard. I don't think we're told like you have a little bit of room to have this wiggle room, and even within the genres too, right? Thinking about format, thinking about
Mhm.
experimentation, like within the span of a book, I think is really
Yeah,
important too. I also forgot to mention I also have Javier Zamora's book,
yeah,
which is so good, and I think those poets are definitely people who play a lot with format and play a lot with just the experience of the way that you hold the book,
hmm,
and yeah, not to be afraid to make it different. I think it's amazing.
yeah, yeah. Not to gossip or anything, but Javier is working on his memoir right now.
Can't wait.
Yeah, I texted him the other day, and he's researching. So he's on the path. I'm really excited about his memoir, and his book is one that I'm really looking forward to. But yeah, these Saeed Jones, Ocean Vuong, Melissa Febos,
This is great.
and Maggie Nelson, who do kind of these genre bending pieces, and the and Carson, who really does it like everything. Those are the people who I really would admire, who like does criticism, does essays, does poetry, and then sometimes you kind of don't even see where one stops and the other ends. So great. That was
I have
one
to
of the
say,
books.
Ocean's book made me so sad.
Yeah.
We read it for our book club, and it was just like, I mean, it's incredible the way that you can just kind of be transported with someone's writing like that. But I was like, man, I got one of my friends, I think, said that she went on a cleaning spree after because she was like, I went to clean my apartment after I read that book.
Yeah, I mean, there's those books that I definitely have those effects on you. And you had mentioned some of them already. Somebody asked, "What are your favorite memoirs?" But
Oh, so many.
yeah, I mean, so is there, I guess, one book that you return to again and again?
Yeah, I mean, lately it was Saeed's book.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, just in terms of thinking about the arc of time, I think I'm trying to do a similar arc in time, and I think we're not too different in ages, if I'm not mistaken. Um, but I think listening to him talk about his story, again, with the specificity and universality, he was saying he called it "How We Fight for Our Lives,"
Hmm.
because thinking about certain identities and certain places that you're growing up and certain communities, etc. I think the use of the "we" in that title was really interesting. So
Hmm.
that's something I've been coming back to again and again. There's just been I've read so many in the past, and since we've done the class, I think it's really been interesting. And also, I don't know if that happens to you though. Lately, I've been taking a break where I felt like I've read so much memoir that I can't read it to enjoy it anymore. I'm reading it for the craft. So
Yeah,
I've kind of been reading more novels to try to
yeah,
get myself out of my head where it's like, okay, I
yeah,
want to enjoy them again just as books, not just say like,
yeah.
how did they do that and how do I do it? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I've really, really tried to get out of the the damage that grad school did, because I used to just enjoy books, and now I read them, and I'm like picking them apart, and trying to find out how they're put together, what they mean, strategies that I can adopt into my own writing, and even I did that majorly when I was working on the memoir, reading other memoirs. Um,
It's so
but
hard. It's so hard. Yeah, not to do. I mean, it's just tough. It's almost
like
impossible.
turning off that part of your brain, that analytic part of your brain that wants to yeah, just analyze everything, and look at everything as craft rather than, I just want to read a story about this. And I thought it could be done by like changing up the kind of reading, but like I would like be reading a car manual and I'd be like, this isn't written right, or like they should have done this here.
I think that's just being a writer. I feel like is the thing. That's the condition that you end up in.
Right.
I was thinking. Oh, I also just read Bone Black by Bell Hooks. And that was really amazing. I feel like I was late to the game with reading that memoir, but it was so good, and I read it so quickly. And I also want to give a shout out to Morgan Jerkin's recent book, which is called Wandering in Strange Lands. And that book is really amazing because it really combines a lot of research, a lot of first person like research and travel with the history of her own family. So
yeah,
so
that's her latest one, right? There's what she had one right before that.
Yeah, that's the latest one. Yeah, the one I read before that I think was Collection of Essays.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Yeah, and I imagine like also like artists go into like a museum and they look at like I wonder what kind of hue they used, or like the technical aspect of it. Like, how did the spatula go in this and that? And
and just like, and I think process is really interesting too. Oh, another one that I really loved last year was Carmen Maria Machado's In the Dream House. And that one I really wanted to know. Yeah, same thing. Like, what was the process? How did she lay things out? Which part came first? And I think even with artworks, you're kind of like, did they have this particular idea, or did it change while they were doing it? I mean, it's just pretty wild. But I think after a while, you just have to be like, okay, I just gotta put my butt in the seat and, see what you can come up with. Or yeah, sometimes switch up the genre. But I hear you. I think it's hard for sure.
Yeah, always. I want to be conscious of the time, so I have one eye on the clock.
I can talk about this forever, especially because what else is there to do now?
I know. I mean, I can show you my dog, but he's not here. I can show the audience my dog, which is he'll make an appearance, hopefully at every one of these salons. But I guess maybe as like as a leaving note, I'll leave it up to you. I was gonna talk about like what are you working on right now? Maybe the details of your larger project, or what is something that you can offer in terms of like advice for someone who's just starting out to write, or maybe who isn't new but it wants to take off to the next leap, take the next leap of, say, like putting the book together or reaching out to agents. So, I'll leave that up to you. Either advice or describe a little bit about your project, and we might have heard it, based off of your selections.
Yeah, I mean, I think especially now it's such a weird time to be making things. I think, as writers and artists, there's always a lot of self-doubt and a lot of outside influences that can stop you from making the work that you want to make. And now I feel like it's even harder. So I would say my biggest piece of advice, first off, is just to have a little grace with yourself and give yourself a little bit of permission to just rest, to just, turn your brain off for a little bit, watch Netflix, take a walk, because the writing will still be there. And I think that we have to look out for ourselves first and foremost. And I'm saying this because it's hard for me to do too. And especially when I'm home, I'm like, well, I could just keep writing. I could just keep going. And so I think that's really important. But also for me, especially coming from my arts and culture writing background and freelance writing, deadlines are just the way that I work. I think finding a group, finding friends who are going to hold you accountable. When I was sending out my materials to try to get an agent, I had a friend and I told her to text me on this day and ask me if I'd finished what I told her I was going to finish. And she put it in her calendar and she texted me and she said, "How's it going?" And I said, "Okay, I'm finished."
I love that.
Sometimes it's that. Sometimes it's a writing group. I mean, now we can all chat on Zoom, have your writing group meet once a month. I've had before the memoir class, I had another really amazing writing group that We still meet once in a while. I've just been super busy lately, but they were really great. We did it once a month. In the before times we went over to each other's houses, but now it's like maybe you guys order the same bottle of wine or you guys have the same snacks, like whatever, to try to make it special and try to say, we're going to show up on this day. We're going to have material. We're going to give each other feedback. I think that is pretty invaluable for sure.
Yeah, it's one of the democratizing features of Zoom and virtual learning. Like you say, we a lot of the meetings that I have would have never happened. A lot of the events, and you're almost people are almost like zoomed out, like just because there's like I suddenly can like just be chilling on Twitter and be like, oh, Jericho Brown's gonna give something. Colson Whitehead's talking right now. Let me just see what's up with Colson.
I know. I'm not on the East Coast, so I can't go to this. Or like, I'm busy that day. It's like, yeah, you can just pop in, which is great.
Right. And I think it's the oversaturation that big cities already had, like, which is why the experiences that I've had when I go to a big city and give a poetry reading or something, or give a reading, sometimes it's hard to get people to show up because there's just so much all the time. Like, oh, I'll just catch him next time he's in town, or there's just such a saturation of people there. So now I think everybody's feeling that because a lot of people have more access.
Yeah, which is great. I mean, I don't think it should be just restricted to. I mean, that's a different conversation. But in terms of how publishing is so restricted to certain major cities, and it's like now we have proof that that doesn't have to be the case. So
right, and you don't have to be in New York to publish, and you never had to, I guess, unless for other very specific reasons. But yeah, it is democratizing of like the whole publishing industry, and I think the whole publishing industry is going through a transformation, not only because of virtual learning, but also like a reckoning of itself. The Dignidad Literaria that came out, for those of you who don't know about that started with like this whack book that came out that was like super exploitative. It was like super just gratuitous and like very, very messy book. It took writers like Miriam Gerba and what's his name? I'm blanking. To kind of really push the industry to do better. There's still so much more work to do because, like you said, you have these stories that often get left behind, and despite the small changes that we see here and there, these stories are still getting left behind. And I think agents need to see the value in these stories, and not just that, but like start optioning these stories and recognize the talent that is there. Just from what we heard today, I can't wait to read your book. And when it gets optioned by Netflix,
I don't know. We'll see. It's just all very nerve-wracking and new still. But
yeah,
I mean, I think Miriam is doing really amazing work. And also I was listening to a talk with her and YubaSutterArts recently, who does some really interesting work too. And that's the thing also, with platforms like Instagram, it's like you go on there and sometimes your favorite authors are just talking about things, and it feels so intimate and just like that's the way that we're going to have these conversations, hopefully using these platforms without waiting for someone to invite us,
Right. Yeah. Making those platforms ourselves rather than, I guess, again, subverting those models of gateholders. So on and so forth, because why not? I mean, I haven't gotten a TikTok yet, but I might.
I mean, these are all still like, social media conglomerates, so you can't really win, but it's still a free thing, which is nice.
Right.
It makes me feel old, but I love all of the dog and cat content.
So. That's all I go for. That's all I go there for there. Well, Eva, I am pretty sure that we have our time is up, unless I was mistaken. But I just wanted to thank you again so much for just a beautiful reading, a beautiful discussion, and everything that you contributed to the space, and for ushering us into our inaugural salon. Thank you so much for that, and I really look
Thank
forward
you.
to staying in touch. Yeah, I know there's everybody who is clapping right now, even though we can't hear them.
I know. So good. Thank you so much.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye.